Life for All presents Daily Food Series Galatians, the Only Gospel, the Gospel of Christ. Title of Book 3, Heirs of God by Pedro. Week 4, For Freedom, Christ has set us free. Sunday, Following Christ by being governed by the Word. Read with prayer. For though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you again the first principles of the oracles of God. And you have come to need milk and not solid food. Hebrews chapter 5, verse 12. As we saw yesterday, we have been hearing the Word of God, which comes to us with the power to accomplish His work. However, for that to happen, we must receive it with faith. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 13. And be careful not to alter it in an attempt to make it more acceptable. If the word that the Lord delivers through His prophet is modified, it loses the power to perform the miracles we have witnessed in our days. In truth, those who seek this leavened spiritual food are the ones who, according to Paul, ought to be teachers by now, concerning the time they have passed, yet still need spiritual milk instead of solid food. In other words, you need someone to teach you again the first principles of the oracles of God. Hebrews chapter 5, verse 12. Solid food, in this context, is the food without leaven. It sustains and has consistency because it refers to the truth of the gospel. And you, dear reader, what do you prefer? Healthy food that nourishes and brings the power of God, or merely a pleasant message to hear? In writing to Timothy, Paul advised, be diligent to present yourself approved to God, a worker who does not need to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 15. He also urged the young man to avoid quarrels about words, which are of no value and only ruin those who listen. That is, to avoid leaven, as well as profane and vain babblings. Verses 14 and 16. Because he was a preacher of the truth, the Apostle Paul became an enemy to those who once loved him, but were later bewitched by other teachings. However, he still had hope. I have confidence in you, in the Lord, that you will have no other mind. But he who troubles you shall bear the judgment, whoever he is. Galatians chapter 5, verse 10. Paul was confident in the Lord that the Galatians would follow sound teachings, and that those who had caused them trouble would not go unpunished. For God, it is very serious to divert people from the truth of the gospel so that they live by their own efforts, which causes them to fall from grace and subjects them to slavery under the law. Surely, those who make the brothers and sisters stumble will not go unpunished. Upon reading Paul's letter, it becomes clear how much difficulty he faced in defending the truth. Acts chapter 14, verses 4, 5, and 19, and chapter 17, verses 5 and 13. He was persecuted, stoned, and beaten. In short, he went through all kinds of suffering. There was a way to avoid this suffering, by tolerating circumcision, so as to preserve the practice of the law, just as the Judaizers wanted. Nevertheless, Paul remained faithful to the Lord. Otherwise, we would not have the pure truth of the gospel with us today. In his time, Paul had to deal with two types of people: the Jews, devoted to Judaism, and the Judaizers, who were Jewish believers that defended the practice of the law. James and the elders of the church in Jerusalem presented Paul during his third missionary journey to the tens of thousands of Jews who had believed and yet were all zealous for the law. Acts chapter 21, verses 17 through 20. Since Paul did not preach the observance of the law, these Judaizers went out from the church in Jerusalem to persecute him. They were the ones who incited the Galatians to rebellion. Regarding this, Paul said, "Therefore, if you died with Christ from the basic principles of the world, why, as though living in the world, do you subject yourself to regulations? Do not touch, do not taste, do not handle, which all concern things which perish with the using, according to the commandments and doctrines of men." Colossians chapter 2, verses 20 through 22. Returning to the practice of the law means returning to the world's elementary principles and following religious rules. Today, we are to obey the word in the newness of life and to follow the direction of the Spirit. Practicing the rules that the Jews wanted to impose on the Gentiles is the same as nullifying the cross of Christ. These things indeed have an appearance of wisdom in self-imposed religion, false humility, and neglect of the body, but are of no value against the indulgence of the flesh. Colossians chapter 2, verse 23. When Paul says that such practices are useless against the indulgence of the flesh, he affirms that even though your flesh may suffer through them, you will not overcome sin nor please God. Therefore, do not fall into that trap. The practice of the law wants to make you go back to following religious rules. Do this and do not do that. The Spirit wants to make a change, but you refuse by saying it was not that way in the past. The pursuit of perfecting the flesh fills you with pride by making you think you have reached a level others cannot attain. We're in the era of the Spirit, the time of faith. Today, we follow Christ and are governed by the Word. Let us walk in the Spirit because our old man has already died with Christ on the cross. The Spirit has freedom. He blows wherever he wills, and we do not know where he comes from or where he is going. God today needs many Abrahams who follow the Spirit wherever he leads. In this way, he shall fulfill his will in our generation. May the Lord return soon.